Tony Henry is our legal expert from Tormey Solicitors in Athlone. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, Will.
Now, you've been doing your homework on this over the last 48 hours, so what conclusions have you come to?
Well, it's first and foremost, I have to express my deepest sympathies to the residents of the Abbeyliex facility, because they're, no doubt about it, they're a vulnerable bunch of people who've served their time as employees of the country and paid their contributions. And we're left with a situation where they're so uncertain about the future, and you would have hoped that when people have found a facility that they're happy with, that they would be given the opportunity to live out their years in that comfort and knowledge and security. Now, having said that, obviously the government are in a position where they have to make decisions, and sometimes the consequences are quite severe. And your key question to the HSE was, well, what happens if people do not move or refuse to move? Legitimate protest is a valid option for people to take in any democracy. So that is something that the HSE will have to deal with. And in general terms, if somebody is technically trespassing on a property, you can get a court order, obviously, confirming that they have to be removed, or an injunction removing them. And if they fail to comply with that injunction, then they can be removed by the appropriate authorities. Now, I can't envisage a situation at all where the HSE would go down that road.
Yeah, well, it would be very bad PR, wouldn't it?
Well, it would be monstrous. I mean, that would be worldwide pictures. I mean, evicting old people from a nursing home that they use. I mean, they are not going to go down that road. I mean, just from a practical point of view.
But how would they even qualify as trespassers, these 28 residents, if they have been living there, in effect, for a number of years?
Well, at the moment they're there under the terms of, I presume, some form of a contract to allow them public nursing home care. And I would presume, I haven't seen the contract, and I'm not even sure if it's a signed contract, but I haven't seen the documentation, but I presume there would be allowances within that contract to confirm that if the premises becomes unsuitable, or there's a shortage of funding, the HSE would have the right to relocate the patients in a more suitable or a more appropriate place. Now, as they would then be requesting them to leave, they technically wouldn't have the permission to be on the premises anymore, and as they don't own the premises, they would be technically trespassing. And then you can get appropriate court orders to seek to have them removed. So
yes, but that would be an appalling vista for all concerned.
It would be. You just couldn't imagine it would happen. And I mean, whatever people say about the HSE, I don't think they would go down the road of getting injunctions against all people who have lived in the premises maybe 10, 20 years, whatever, So I just don't see that happening.
Yes, and I think we should be at pains to stress that as well, because I'm conscious that there are people listening to this who may be very much afraid and terrified by that prospect. And
I think that's why the HSE were, maybe I wouldn't use the word evasive, but they were avoiding answering the technical legal question. I mean, I'm talking in a very general sense. And we have, I suppose, not an exact example, but the protests in St. Paul's Cathedral in London. I mean, the protesters are there, and the church body there took a different view. Some of them within the organisation took a different view as to how to deal with it. And the people who suggested they go to the court route and get them removed ultimately resigned, because it looked really bad from the church's point of view that they were removing protesters who were basically protesting about the state of the economy, and I think that is a situation where the public would be would consider very poor action on the part of the church if they decided to forcibly remove protesters. I mean, you've got to remember, these protesters would be young, and they have had no right to stay in a public place. So having elderly people removed forcibly by the HSE is just unconscionable. They wouldn't do it. I mean, it's not going to happen. So what they're going to try and do, obviously, is negotiate with the people that are there and see if they can come up with a compromise. But having spoken to some of the people involved in the campaign, they're very determined, and I think that I have to admire their effort and time they're putting into trying to keep the facility available to people in the Abbeyliex area. But from a legal point of view, I can't see any action that the residents could take to support their view and their position. And
from a legal perspective, though, the HSE would have a duty of care, and I presume so long as the HSE engaged with those residents to find alternative accommodation, then that duty of care would be satisfied.
Oh yes, I mean that's a given. They would have to do that. And now the only thing I would say as well is that the uncertainty must be very, very worrying for the family and friends of the residents. I mean, the stress is a huge problem for people, and you know, if they're concerned about where they're going to end up, or is a new accommodation going to be as nice or as comfortable or as near to their loved ones, all that is very worrying. So I would hope that the answers you got from the HSE are accurate, and that they are liaising with them and trying to comfort the people who are obviously directly affected by this decision to close the facility.
Tony Henry from Tormey Solicitors in Athlone, thanks very much for taking the time to look into that.